Welcome everybody to the Sales Architects podcast. This is the fourth episode, and today I have Richard Lucas from 11 Content with me. Hey Richard, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. Anytime. So Richard and I have been working together recently. We met a couple of months ago, and we've been talking quite a lot about how my services and his services interweave with each other. And content marketing is just a fascinating area for me that really links into what I do as well. So I wanted to bring him on today to kind of discuss marketing in general, content marketing specifically, and what you can do as a small business to really get out there and do some great content next year. So maybe Richard, if you could start with telling me a little bit about what you do, what 11 does, maybe a bit of your history as well, and then we'll jump into some broader questions.
Okay, so where do I start? We'll start with me. I suppose my background has mainly been in media. Which I did up until 2012, working in the main sort of traditional media spaces and focusing really on the digital space within those media companies. So I worked for Capital Radio. I did a stint at the Guardian Media Group, and then at the end a bit of Microsoft and Yahoo as well. And all of that really led me into my passion, which was always to run my own business. And I was fortunate enough to lead a digital transformation program as a Guardian Media Group. And that sort of made me really think about what I wanted to do afterwards. And so I set up a digital transformation consultancy. And that was back in 2012. And that was in the days when digital transformation wasn't really a thing. It was, people were doing it, but it wasn't really sort of a term that was very big. Anyway, let's just say as the years went on, really did become something quite large, and what I would class now as just modern business. And that was really an opportunity for me to think about really the scale of digital transformation and what part do we want to do? What part am I really passionate about doing? And it was really always about, rather than the infrastructure changes that you get involved in a digital transformation program, it was about what you do on top of that platform and that infrastructure. And so with that in mind, we sort of spun out of our consultancy and 11 was born. And it was born really to focus on what you do on that infrastructure, in particular around content and content marketing. So that was in September last year. So we've literally just gone over our first year.
Awesome. So how has that first year been for you guys? How have you, obviously, vast majority of that year has been in COVID times. So how has that gone for you guys? Have you seen a positive, negative impact? I'm always interested to see what 2020 has brought to different businesses that I work with.
Well, considering our background is digital transformation, COVID, if anything, has accelerated what was already accelerating. So it's been fascinating on that front. But for a new brand, it's a challenge. I think it sort of stopped momentum like it did everybody in March time. And I think the clients in particular thinking, how do we communicate? Especially in the early days of March, April, what's the best way of doing that? And I think there's just a big sort of pause. And we advised our clients on that. So I said, look, let's just halt here. Let's think about what we want to do and just regroup. So we did what most people did, I suppose. And that is really just think about what we want to do afterwards, how we're going to come out of this. So quite a lot of preparation work. Let's do that work that we said we were going to do last year, but we just haven't got round to it, like sorting out some sites, website pages, landing pages. We did a lot of that work until everybody felt a bit more comfortable to come out of it. And that's sort of, we saw that really around sort of August, September. I noticed in August, which traditionally is quite a quiet month for us, because everybody's on holiday, and clearly they weren't this year. And I think everybody was preparing for September and onwards. So it started to really busy up about that point, really.
Yeah, I found that as well this year. I mean, I was still employed at my previous employer earlier on this year. But yeah, you're right. There's the ability to refocus as long as you hadn't furloughed all of your staff, which some businesses were quite hasty to do, I think. But for obvious reasons, financial reasons. But there is this ability to take stock, step back, and assess what do I need to do as a business to be able to come out of this whenever this is going to end in a stronger position. And so for me, I'm really interested to talk to you about content marketing and how that can help pull people out of where they are at the moment with their business and really go and attack it next year. Obviously, a lot of people were hoping that it would be end of 2020 that things would recover. It's looking like it's going to be extended a lot further than that. So based on that, what do you think in 2021 and beyond businesses can really do to maximize their brand presence, do a better job of getting their content out online, and ultimately drive sales again to recover their businesses moving forward?
Yeah, great question. Because content, I think, and content marketing and inbound marketing certainly were, they're not new, they've been present for a while. But again, I think it's been accelerated, the need for it. And I don't know about your experience, but well, I do, because we've had a conversation about it a few times. But I think it's similar in terms of meeting new people online and people becoming comfortable with this medium that we're talking through now.
Yeah.
And I think the cat's out of the bag. I don't think that that's going to necessarily disappear next year at all. I just think that we will probably do this as well as meet people face to face. So where does content sit in all of that? I think it becomes even more important to look at content as assets. I remember reading this from Daniel Priestley, actually, one of his books, which we might talk about later. But he said something that was really good, which I'll repeat here. He just sort of said, think of content and as an asset in the way that you would think of a property that you rent is an asset. But digital assets, if you like, think of white papers, your website. These are assets in their own right, but they are so much more scalable because they don't have the restrictions that bricks and mortar do. And I think that if you think about that, it's quite useful then to think about your website as an asset, to think about content, about your product information. How are you going to be able to scale that? How are you going to get that across globally, potentially, rather than just maybe a smaller sort of audience that you might have been thinking about beforehand? So I would think about content in three different ways I would suggest to anybody. And that is, think about it from not only from a marketing your product perspective. So there's product information that we can turn into really good content. And then there's also stakeholder. Let's call it stakeholder content that needs to be produced. Mm-hmm. So whether that's for prospects, whether it's for, let's say you have investors in your business, communicating with them, how do you do that? What about your supply chain? How are you communicating with them? So there's a whole stakeholder piece in terms of content.
Sure.
And then thirdly,
sorry to interrupt, I presume that's often overlooked as an avenue that people consider within their content marketing. Is that the case, do you find, or actually?
I do. I do think that. I think, and the third area as well is talent and talent acquisition. And again, I think that is overlooked too. I think most people think of content directly as, from a marketing perspective, a direct to customer acquisition. Actually, yeah, crucial. But there's a bigger play for content to be had in your business. So just looking at the talent piece in its own right, let's say you are a scale-up business. You're a scale-up business, you have taken on a significant round of investment. And actually, the investment is not necessarily the hardest bit to get. You've got the investment to move as quickly as possible. You want to move as quickly as possible, trying to attract the right talent into your business. I use an example of Manchester last year, talking to founders of exactly in this position, with offices globally, but one central office in Manchester at the same time that Amazon decided to put 600 new jobs into Manchester.
Right.
With their brand.
Sure.
So content has a role to play in that too, which we can talk about in more detail. But I would say look at content in a more holistic way, and look at your full ecosystem.
Right. Okay. So you've got those three areas of kind of product marketing, stakeholder marketing, and talent marketing. Within each of those three, is there a preferred channel or a preferred type of media that you would recommend that works better? Presumably, for example, talent marketing is better done on platforms like Twitter and Instagram as opposed to LinkedIn, for example, if you're a B2B business. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but that's what I've always assumed anyway. So maybe you could just educate me and the audience a little bit on those different channels and types of media that should be used in each of those.
Yeah, okay. Well, the first thing I would say is getting it right on your own platform first, and identifying the source and creating the source of that content. So with any content, I'd like to look at it as a platform position first. So let's get it right on your own website. Where is it going to be housed initially? And then we look at the channels. Then you've got to look at your sort of technology behind that, which we can talk about, I'm sure in a bit. But the thing that I would say more than anything else is creating source content. And what I mean by source content is the original piece of truth, if you like, whether that is a full article, or probably more importantly, it could be a piece of research that you've done, that you're able then to break out or atomize into lots of different pieces of content in order to get that message across. This, I would say, is probably the biggest thing for us. And then the channels become evident after that of where you're going to distribute.
Mm-hmm. So that source content strategy, then, do you follow some particular type of methodology? I mean, I'm not a marketer, but I've heard of terms like having pillar content and then satellite content that sits around that.
Yeah.
How would you typically go about building a good quality backbone of source content that can be used across these different channels, for example?
So the first thing we would always look for with a client is to take it one step back and think about who this content is for. So the first thing we want to have a look at really is the market and to identify. So we do SON work, looking into who exactly our target market and audience is, really thinking about their pain points. So actually drawing up a person, a persona of who our ideal customer is. Going from that ideal customer to actually thinking about those questions about what keeps them up at night, and really drawing out those pain points. Once we know those pain points, we've really got under the skin of who we're trying to target. And then we go about solving those pain points and how we can do that and answering those through. That's the basis, if you like, the very bones, if you like, of creating a piece of source content. Then you can use a whole different series of things. It could be surveys, you could be doing a bit of research, could be partnering up with different communities that have pools of our target market, and then drawing out expertise from it. So we might take a survey, for example, extract the insight from it, create a series of articles that come out the back of that, and bring that all together into one really nice piece with some interviews, and have that as a downloadable piece of source content that you would have on your site. And then we use the channels then to sort of distribute that out and bring people to that source so that we can collect the data.
Got you. So that's where I go wrong, I think, in terms of how I do it, and probably how many other businesses do it as well, is that you think, where am I going to put this first? And then you kind of reverse engineer to try and build a piece of content that fits for that platform. But I guess the more holistic view is to say, okay, well, what type of content do my audience at large want to see, hear, read? And therefore, let's create something that works multi-channel, in different places, in different forms. And therefore, it's going to be relevant to them and can be kind of reused on an evergreen basis.
Yeah, yeah. But what you're doing there is, if you approach it from that point of view, you're always coming from the true source. And then it's aligned through the different channels that you work through, rather than the message being slightly lost across different channels as you repurpose content. But if you're going from one source of truth, and that truth is, if you stick to the fact that how can I add the most value to my persona, how am I really going to help solve their problems? And if you've done that thinking and that piece, that's why it's so valuable. Then the job's to sweat it. Let's make that piece of content work really hard. Break it up into different pieces of different messages, and then you start thinking about the channels, and then how to portray that information that might be better in an infographic, or a slide deck might be better on LinkedIn compared to something else on YouTube, for example. But it's come from the same source. But
sure. Okay, so yeah, content marketing strategy has so many more facets to it than I ever knew that there was, and I guess that's why working with an agency such as yourselves is critical to taking that step back and getting all of that content out of the minds of the people that work for your clients, and then laying out this strategy that's going to be working hard for you as a business long term, not just a single use bits of content that are very specifically designed for certain channels.
I think it's an interesting combination from a client's perspective. I think that there's lots of options to work with content providers, and whether it's an agency like 11 or other suppliers, because it depends on the resources that you've got in house. But that's thinking, and being able to extract that thinking about the persona. If we can do that in house and bring some of that out, create the source content. The rest of the distribution could be, for example, done in-house, or it could be done out of house. So it just purely depends on the resources that you've got. But it's a good mixture. There's got to be collaboration to get to the root of those pain points.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a mentor of mine way back when used to always say, outsource the things that you're not good at, but in that process of outsourcing them, make sure that you're working with them so that the parts of that process that you are good at, and typically if you're a founder of a smaller business, you're going to know your product the best, you're going to know your target audience's pain points the best, and it's getting that kind of information across to whoever you're going to outsource it to in a way that they can really utilize that information to build a strong content strategy. That's the important part of working with an agency to accelerate your growth from a small startup towards a scale up size.
Well, I agree with that, and also just to sort of say from a piece of advice I was given from a mentor as well, and this mentor was in-house, and they said from an in-house perspective, and they say to their teams always, look, just because you think that you can do this work doesn't mean that you should, because actually let's get it done on top of the work that you're doing as well. Get that somebody that does this and they're the best of their game, because it's about speed. Because just because you can do it doesn't mean that you will find time for it, and it just won't get done.
Yeah.
And actually, it's best to get done and move with speed.
Exactly. Yeah, I always refer back to I trained as an economist originally, believe it or not. So I always refer a lot of things back to the concept of opportunity cost. If you're spending 5 days working on building out a content strategy and it's not in your wheelhouse and it's not something that you're an expert in or you're trained to do successfully, then those 5 days, use one of those days to help the content team work on a more successful strategy, but then you've got those other 4 days back now to run your business and do something else that's more successful than trying to conduct a failed content strategy. I see that in some of the consulting that I've done with smaller, like pre-revenue startups in the past. They're trying to do everything, and sometimes you have to do everything because you're bootstrapped. You don't have the funding. And that kind of moves on to a topic that I wanted to cover with you. So you mentioned scale ups earlier, and I know that that's kind of your target market, the area that you think your team has the most impact with. So what would you say are the kind of stumbling blocks that smaller startup businesses have when they're making that transition towards becoming a scale up business? And obviously being a scale up is a long journey and it can last for a long time, but that initial phase of becoming a scale up and kind of a post successful startup, what are the stumbling blocks that you find has come across with regards to marketing and strategy around marketing?
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a great question, but being able to make that transition and what determines that you have made that transition from a startup to no, we're into scale up mode. And how long is that going to last? It's a really interesting point in the whole journey that I would class it as our absolute sort of sweet spot. And I would call it, from a marketing point of view, the perfect storm. It's when, let's just say, take a scenario of a tech startup that has raised a couple of rounds, and now they've raised a significant round. Let's say it's pre-Series A.
Right.
So let's say at that point, in order to have achieved that, there's some things that must have been ticked off. So let's just say we have got traction. We've found our product has got market fit, and therefore we have attracted significant investment to be able to move this on at scale. So that's the point there where congratulations, well done, you've got to this point, but actually this is really where the hard work starts, and some of the problems I've seen can identify themselves or manifest themselves at this point. So those questions that might come out at that point are things like, well, okay, how do we move as quickly as possible? We've got this investment, so we want to grab as much market share as quickly as possible. So everything's about speed. In order to do that and grow at this sort of an exponential rate, we need to be able to do the same in terms of recruitment. So we're back to talent again, and being able to bring talent in at the right time. We need to be able to take our product and be able to fit that into a maybe selling to enterprise. So commercializing our product again at scale, and with a level of maturity that's going to be brought at that point. Now, these key things, sometimes you see founders saying, well, why is this so damn hard? What is it? Why is this so difficult? We've got the money in it. We've got a great product. Why am I finding it so difficult in those areas? And I put one of the major factors of this down to a sort of underrepresentation of marketing, and there's good reason for it. Looking at those businesses when they were startup, let's say the tech startup, the traditional makeup is of a CEO that is front-facing, is focused on investment and the face of the business going forward and leading the team. You need to have a CTO, in this example, that is going to lead the products and the product build and that roadmap that goes with it. And the same for a commercial position as well. So it could be a CCO. Later on, there might be an operations director as well to run the whole thing. But that's generally the makeup, certainly of those businesses that we've been involved in, and for quite good reasons. And you rarely see a marketeer on that founding team. And I find that going through that startup to scale up position, there's good reason for it, because I don't think you necessarily need it at that point. You do need you scramble together a website, scramble together a logo, some content that sort of fits and describes what we do. And that's about it, because you've got bigger things to worry about, which is investment and about the product itself, where you've got nothing. So you can see those types of things, but when you get into scale up mode and you start to scale your team outside of tech, you're starting to look at the commercialized model. This is when that lack of investment really hits in. And it kicks in at that point. And so that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks, I think, to be able to sort of make it from that level to, say, Series A, one of those stumbling blocks is this lack of brand framework that is going to be able to take you through to scale properly. How are you going to take your team on from a cultural perspective without that brand framework and recognition? How are you going to be able to convince customers with the right level of credibility in your brand without really good content that talks about your product from a credibility point of view? That takes content and marketing, and the same really for recruiting talent. How are you going to be able to do that if your brand's not strong enough in the marketplace and they've no idea really what you do, etc., etc. So,
yeah, I mean that definitely resonates with some of the clients that I've worked with, and just being in the network of the startup world, and especially in tech, like you say, there's really good, strong, maybe over-representation of product people, technical people within founding teams. And like you say, bringing on someone with some marketing expertise at that stage is really going to help you then drive into this scalability mode, into scale up mode. So can you just give us some ideas of then what are the specific activities? Let's say you're just about to hire, or you've just hired in your marketing representative that will sit on the board or sit as somewhere in and around the board structure of a startup. What are the specific activities that they can now be doing to get you into that transitionary mode of being a scale up and actually being successful in the early stages of being a scale up?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll just identify some of the challenges that some of your listeners, if they're in this might have found with recruiting that position. And I seem to see a lot of those startup scale up that sort of get to this point and go, right, let's bring in-house, let's bring in the marketeer. Quite often they either bring in somebody too junior and their expectations of that position are too high. They're asking them to align with what the board's trying to achieve, strategically put that together, put a plan in place, and then deliver it all. Is too much. Secondly, bringing in a senior position has its challenges as well, because actually strategically they bring that skill set that's required, but you don't necessarily need that full time. So I see that sort of going between the two quite often and not getting the position right. And fundamentally, it's because they need a bit of both. But they don't need both. So that's why it goes. But actually, to answer your question about what's required, I think aligning a marketing strategy, first of all, is the first thing you need to put in place, as I sort of mentioned before, is a brand framework. So let's just make sure that your vision is, you can articulate that, your mission, your vision, where you're going, and who that you're targeting. That documenting that piece of work is invaluable, because later on down the line, other suppliers will need to use that information. So brand style guidelines come into that, and anybody that's going to write or produce any content on your behalf as your startup, it needs to be aligned in what they're doing. So that documentation is pretty crucial. So I'd always focus on that first, that framework. Secondly, it's a marketing strategy. It's a marketing strategy that aligns with the founder's vision and also the expectations from their stakeholders of what needs to be achieved, because fairly high, lofty sales conversion targets will be put into place. How are we going to do that? So that marketing strategy is really crucial, which leads then into a system, and I'd call it a system, a marketing, I like to call it something like a marketing accelerator system, that actually is going to generate marketing qualified leads predominantly, and put that system in place for the commercial team or commercial person to be able to really sort of ramp that up. So there's the system, the architecture to be put in place, and within that you need the fuel, and that fuel to me is predominantly content, but then it's bringing in other partners to it as well at the right time. So those partners could be PR, It could be certainly paid media opportunities, as well as data partnerships, and just different product partnerships across the board, really. So it's a combination of bringing the right partners in at the right time to fulfill and execute on that marketing plan.
Got you. Yeah. And that actually really resonates a lot with me and the work that I do on the sales side as well, because I find a lot of clients that I've worked with or that I've been involved with, they get to a certain point by virtue of having a great product, and it's kind of selling itself up to a certain point of, a few £1 million turnover, annual turnover. You can kind of get to that point on virtue of a great product. Yeah. And then the founder wants to step back and they want to implement a sales process, and they kind of juggle between, again, exactly the same situation. Do I need a head of sales, or do I just need to bring on 2 or 3, like an SDR and 2 BDs, business development reps? And, bringing on a head of sales, yeah, okay, they probably cost about the same as those 3 individuals. What do you want to do? Do you want to build a sales architecture, a sales process, and, have the right fit CRM, have the right qualification processes, and build a system by which you can then plug more and more BDs into over time to properly scale? Or do you want to just capture all of the opportunity that's there, within grasp right now by hiring as many BDs as you can that can just execute on the inbound leads that you've generated by virtue of having a great product?
But this is where our 2 areas really sort of interconnect, because I passionately believe it's, especially in the B2B space, that marketing's job is to serve the sales operation. And that's what it's for. It's there to do the funnel slightly above that, to be able to sort of make a smooth sort of entry into exactly what you talked about.
Exactly, yeah. I always think of it as the kind of broad-based hopper that sits just above the sales funnel. You can see, obviously, you see all of these images all the time of a sales funnel, but really the marketing hopper shouldn't be sat to the side of the sales funnel. It should be sat on top of the sales funnel, and that's the place that.
But fundamentally, it's the same. It's one funnel.
Exactly. Yeah, well, when it's well integrated, anyway. And what we both often find, I'm sure, is that, yeah, exactly, that sales and marketing actually aren't very well aligned. Unfortunately, it does happen, and it takes some oiling, it takes some time to get that machine well oiled. Okay, yeah, no, I mean, that's really interesting. Definitely, the alignment between sales and marketing is important. Had a few questions for you around kind of recommendations and pitfalls that you've seen in the industry that you work in, and how people can avoid those. Sometimes I ask, what are the common questions that people ask you to get an idea of, where your expertise is and how you help them. But actually what I find more interesting is, what are the questions that people should be asking you that they don't ask you? And what would your answers be to those questions that they should be asking you, that's actually going to make a difference for them in marketing and in their content strategy?
I think most of the time, questions they do ask, which will lead into questions they should ask. You might be a simple one of like, how much does I need a new website? How much does that cost? An example, I need a piece of content. How much does that cost? When actually, how do I attract more traffic to my website instantly? And that could be to sort of achieve prospects, new prospects, or it could be new talent. The questions they should be asking really around, I think, are questions around metrics of ROI. So what's the value in my website is a better question than how much does it cost. It's not really drilling down to what's it there for. What's this platform here to do? What is the ROI versus the lifetime value of a prospect? What is the lifetime value of bringing a prospect in, and how do we sort of term success in that front? When is it qualified, and how much is that really worth? And that's where we're crossing over into marketing and sales. I think getting into that question early on will lead to the next bit, which is I try and bring this out with questions, but what does success look like at the beginning of the relationship? I try to take the customers potential customers, or when we first start on board, of what does success look like for you with this relationship that we put in place in 6 months and then 12 months? And I'll help you sort of articulate that. And I'll tell you what I think it is, and then align those things. So it's really about coming up with the metrics for success that are both objective and subjective.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you say, cost is a very static metric, whereas value is a very dynamic metric. And the only way that you're really going to understand the ROI of having done some kind of activity is if you understand what value it had to your business. And a lot of people get hung up on, metrics are super important, but a lot of people get hung up on the high level ones that aren't actually measurable. Sorry, they are easily measurable, but they're not easily influenceable. So a lot of salespeople, for example, talk about, well, if I bring on this BD, how much revenue are they going to generate for us this year? Okay, all of the activities of a BD over the course of a year is what contributes to their revenue contributions to your business. But actually, the metrics that you should be thinking about are, how can I improve their, or for an SDR, how can I improve their dialing rate? How can I increase the number of calls that they're having? How can I increase the successfulness of the calls that they're having that's actually generating opportunities for my BDs to pick up? And then later in the sales cycle, how can I improve my sales process, my questioning, my qualification process to increase the conversion rates into late stage opportunities, and things like that, as opposed to just saying, you've got a 500 grand quota this year, go figure. The job of a leader within sales and within the marketing area should be, how can I increase the click-through rate? How can I increase the engagement rates? How can I increase the call volumes? And those are the things that are actually influenceable by your staff, the people that are actually doing those activities, right?
It is, and it's also about getting in place a culture of recording that data early on board, so early on as possible, so that you have a point, a benchmark to work from across those metrics. The other thing I would say is asking that same type of question, or with all stakeholders, not just your key stakeholder, and trying to merge those together. So let's say it's a founding team. They're going to have different ideas of what success looks like. Bringing those together and then getting agreements on that, or what that looks like before you even start the work, is invaluable.
Yeah, completely agree. And often in sales, again, we find that the CS, the account management piece, sits under more of an operational division within businesses, and the sales piece sits under sales. And obviously the handover between a salesperson and the account manager that picks up the relationship after the sale is closed is critically important. But if the heads of those departments aren't aligned on making sure that the salesperson captures the success criteria and then actually tells the account manager what that is, so that they can go and measure that and keep note of that throughout the life cycle of the client, then you just won't have any idea about how influential you are and how your metrics associate with the work that you're doing day to day. So yeah, no, absolutely, that's a really good point. Like tracking those metrics and having somewhere to put it, which I'll bang on about it every single day, is have a CRM as soon as possible, even if it's a free one. HubSpot's free CRM is good enough to keep track of basic metrics, basic contact records, deal information, and you don't necessarily need more than that in the early days.
Just start recording.
Exactly. And then it becomes useful to you later, because that's how you increase the effectiveness of your business, by analyzing that data and really understanding.
Absolutely.
So a couple more questions. I appreciate that we're coming up to the hour. I like to ask this one because I think it's always really interesting, especially for people that are aspiring to get into the position that you're in as an owner of an agency, a marketing agency. What do you think the best mistake was that you ever made, and what did you learn from that experience? And therefore, what would you recommend that young marketeers don't do if they want to be successful?
In terms of starting a business?
Well, anything, whatever you think your best mistake was, is as an employed person or as a business owner. Where do you think that mistake was? How early on in your career was it, and how kind of influential is it now in where you are today?
Oh gosh, I would say one of the biggest mistakes that well, not so much a mistake, but pitfalls to worry about, which has caused issues, and that's underestimating how not making a decision is making a decision. That makes sense,
Yes.
especially when you start your own business and actually that procrastinating, you need to move at pace, and actually just making a decision. It might not be the right one, but going through that process.
Hmm.
And also the other one really is to trust your gut.
Hmm. Yeah.
Really go with it, because you'll know that could be taking on a client that it is not the right fit. You might have that feeling, you've qualified them, but actually, is it the right match? But for other reasons, you might have taken them on board. I've done that in the early days, and it does come back generally, to bite you,
Yeah.
and it become a unprofitable client, and probably more importantly, demoralizing, because you just can't do your best work if you don't align at the beginning and set the expectations on both parties of what you want from this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the point around acting quickly and making sure that you do something, because doing nothing is often the worst thing that you can do. And a lot of people think that doing nothing is, for now, the best thing that I can do in case I make a mistake. But actually, you learn from making those mistakes, and therefore you're not going to take on that type of profile of customer again. If you took on one of their competitors that operates very similarly in the past and you realize that they're not a good fit for you, then that's probably not the right industry that you should be targeting, or the right size of company that you should be targeting. Do you have like a framework for decision making? It doesn't have to be formalized, but do you have like a general rule of thumb to say, if I'm sat on a decision for more than a week, I'm just going to go with something? That's what I tend to do, is sort of a week or two. If I'm still thinking about it, then I'll move on and make some kind of decision at least.
Not in terms of that time frame, but it's a good idea. And actually putting a deadline on it's a really good idea. I sort of have a process where I'll talk to a couple of people about it, and try and get their input before making a decision. But it just plays bigger on your mind, and it takes up more space until you make that decision. Great analogy of like eating your frog, which is one I don't even know about. It just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger in your mind, until you deal with it.
Okay, so let's just do the final question to close out. And this one I found is really kind of interesting for people to follow up on this conversation that we're having. What are your major professional influences in terms of books that you've read, podcasts that you've listened to, videos that you've watched by certain, they don't have to necessarily be influencers, but just people that have had an influence on your professional career? Obviously, you mentioned Dan Priestley, and we've spoken about him before as well. Maybe can you recommend like one of his specific books that are worth a read, and anything else that you think's worth a read?
Yes, yeah, well, let's start with him. There's a couple of things that align with what he does, which aligns with what 11 does as well, which mainly around key person of influence. That's his book that I would recommend first. He's done quite a number of books, but it's a really good book because it focuses on understanding the importance of personal branding, and taking that forward. He's a real big believer in content as well, actually, and creating those assets. So I'd really recommend that, because it gives you a really good framework as well about how you can maybe frame your business and direction going forward. It gives some really good milestones, and opens up the fact that you can do this right at the beginning. You do not need to have lots of investment behind you. You just need to have a good plan, and go for it using the amazing tools that are out there that we all know are there for free to be able to use. So I think it's a really good starting space. More in the marketing space, I like Simon Sinek's book, Find Your Why. It gets to the fact that what I like about that more than anything else is that it's really human. It tries to get away from a lot of the business jargon and just go, okay, but why really are you here? Why are you doing this business? And it goes back to that brand framework, introducing some of that work right at the beginning, making you really think about why you're doing this. It just makes you stand out and really make you think about that. So I'd certainly recommend that book.
Yeah, I've always found Simon Sinek's stuff to be great for. I mean, I work a little bit with young entrepreneurs and do a bit of mentoring, and I find that people like him are really good influencers for you to read when you're kind of studying at university or you're starting out on the journey of becoming an independent business owner. Having that kind of humanity centered in what you do and knowing what your values are, and not overcomplicating everything with jargon, basically. Like, try to boil what you do down to the reason why you're doing it, not what you think professional enterprise people want to hear, is really
exactly. The other thing I'd mention is more of a research piece, actually. And just to bring it back into sort of content and content marketing. And that was Google's piece on the 0 moment of truth, which it's just really good a way of explaining why you need to do content if you own a business. The 0 moment of truth is a piece that was done in, I think, 2012. It was an enormous piece of research that tried to answer the question of how long does it take to get from not knowing a customer, or it could be a relationship, from nothing to a trusted relationship where you've bought something and you've got a relationship. Fundamentally, it's trying to sort of equate that. And it came out with a nice little thing that said that you need 11 touch points. And that's fundamentally why we called the business 11, was based off this.
I see.
So, yeah, it's one of the reasons that you need 11 touch points across 7 hours and 4 different destinations. And so think about that for a second. 7 hours of touch point to get from point A to point B. You need a lot of touch points there, of which content plays a massive part in it. And if there's anything to sort of tell you why people have expectations too high about building a website and expecting somebody to come to that website for the first time and then purchase or achieve the call to action, it's because they've only been there for 2 minutes at best out of that 7 hours. That's a really good piece from a marketing point of view about why going forward next year we really need to sort of bring more marketing content assets and collateral into what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think people also overweight the influence of sales conversations as well. Obviously, it's super important, and being a salesperson, your overall pitch will live and die on your discovery call and probably the call after that, where you do an initial product demo and kind of outline what it is that you want to achieve with the client and collecting their an understanding of what they're trying to achieve. But again, that's like an hour and a half to 2 hours maximum of the overall journey.
Yeah.
Even sales calls, if you top them all up across the sales process, might only constitute half of that 7 hour time frame. And so, what are the other, if it's 2 minutes on the website and 3.5 hours in sales calls, well, where's the other 3 hours and 28 minutes coming from? And that's where content is so important.
And it comes from all different parts of content through the funnel, through top of the funnel, through articles that answer pain points. It is a good start, to middle of the funnel downloads, to case studies, and then also, hopefully next year a bit more, but events, meeting people in person, one-to-ones, chats, all of those add up in general, but they're all touch points. But you're right, there's a big gap on either side where content can play a part.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, all right. It's been really interesting talking to you, Richard. I think some of these lessons around tactically what you can actually do, and then strategically in terms of having a marketing influence at the right time in the development of your business, in the early stages of your business growth, is super important. And like you say, a lot of people overlook it. and it just needs people like us to talk about it and tell people that that's the case and that they need to be thinking about it some more. So hopefully this will influence someone that's listening to think more heavily about marketing and the role that it should play in their business's development, and how important content is to fill that 3.5 hour gap that they need to fill in their process.
I hope so.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Richard. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we'll catch up again
Thank
soon.
you very much.
And see you soon. One for the listeners, please share this content to your colleagues, friends, and come back again for another podcast in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much.